Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Um, I'm just going to give a couple minutes for people to um, join we have a few more people coming in. Just as a reminder, everyone's videos and mics are turned off. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat and then we'll try to get to them after the presentation. To, this afternoon, we're happy to have Suzanne Roy. She's a leading wild horse advocate and consultant for animal welfare causes. She currently serves as a policy advisor for American Wild Horse Conservation, where she was executive director from 2016 to 2025. So I will let her continue to tell you what she's doing these days and start her presentation. Thank you for being here, Suzanne.
Thank you, Chris, for inviting me. I appreciate it. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in. As Chris said, I'm Suzanne Roy. I've been animal welfare professional for close to 3 decades, and I have worked on the wild horse issue for the last 15 years. And then first, I worked as the director of American Wild Horse Campaign when it was a project of Return to Freedom. And then in 2016, it was spun off and we became our own nonprofit. And I led the group until late last year. And I'm now, as Chris said, focusing on some consulting and some volunteer work. I'm still involved with wild horse advocacy. I help a number of organizations, and I have a Substack, which allows me to do what I really like to do, which is write about policy issues and things like that. So if you see the screen, I do have a QR code there, and you can get to my Substack by that, and it's free to subscribe.
Suzanne, just so
So,
you know, we're not seeing your screen
oh, you're
share.
not, oh, you can't see it?
No, we're just seeing you.
Do you have to allow me to screen share?
No, you should be able to. I made you a co-host, so if you hit the share down at the bottom, you should be able to share your screen.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. Sorry about that. Here we go. Okay, how about that? Oh, now it
Yep,
all comes up. Oh, perfect. Yeah.
yep, we can see it now.
Okay, great. Okay, so 15 years in the wild horse advocacy trenches, and that is the QR code that will take you to my Substack, or you just search for my name on Substack. And I hope, people will follow along. It's not no cost to subscribe. So I got involved in the issue in 2009. I had been working on animal welfare issues for quite a while on elephants and marine mammals in captivity, conservation in the wild. I also worked on chimpanzees in research, helped shut down a horrible chimpanzee testing lab and got all the animals to sanctuary. But I had not really heard about the wild horse issue. Like, I kind of knew it was out there, wild horses on BLM lands. I didn't really know what wild BLM lands were. I lived in California, but I really didn't. Um, so when I heard about it, it was 2009 when the BLM rounded up Cloud, the famous stallion from the Pryor Mountains. And Ginger Catherines and the Cloud Foundation just did a fantastic job of raising awareness and raising hell about the capture of Cloud. Now, he was let go, but just the imagery of them stampeding this wild stallion into the trap with his family, it was quite shocking, and Ginger did a great job of really getting it out there. And I learned about it, and I had never worked on horse issues, but my daughter was she was about 12 at the time, and she'd been a horse girl since she was 4. So basically our whole life was, everywhere we went, we had to go see horses. So it really intrigued me. So I got involved, and then I went to my first BLM advisory board meeting in October of 2009. Actually, I think my daughter was like 10 then. And then she came with me, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing, and I just kept saying, this just doesn't make sense. It just did not make sense to me that the BLM would just keep rounding up horses and put them in holding. And there was one person on the board from, I think it was the Horse Protection Association, who said, very gingerly to the BLM, well, I really wish you'd spend more money on managing the horses on the range with fertility control than removing them. But she was almost timidly saying it, and the whole rest of the board was stacked. And so it was quite an experience. Ginger actually stood up and during that meeting and turned her back to the board in protest. But I came away with that really scratching my head, like how can this be happening? And then in October 2010, I traveled to a roundup to witness a roundup firsthand, and it was in Silver King, way out in eastern Nevada. And I watched a stallion be stampeded into the trap with his small family, and I watched him break his neck and die. And it was a horrendous experience. It showed me the callousness of the BLM. The reason he broke his neck was because a wrangler tied his saddle horse outside the pen, right outside of where the stallion was. And he had just been separated from his mare and foal, who were in the next pen, and he perceived that as a threat, and so he charged the bars and he went down. It doesn't happen slowly. He got up a few times. It was a horrible thing. But anyway, that's his mare and foal on the right. We named him Braveheart. We named her Callie, and the foal Amber. And Return to Freedom found them. The mare and foal reunited them and took them to sanctuary. And Callie was actually pregnant and she had a baby. But the brutality that I witnessed, and the absolute callousness, and also the hostility of the BLM, because they were furious that we filmed this and took photos. And I was there with my colleague and friend Denise Boble, who really worked on AWHC with me from the beginning. So and Denise, by the way, told me, you have to work on this with me. Just give it 2 years. We'll have it solved in 2 years. And that was 2009. Now it's 2015. So, but what really happened then was that the Cloud Roundup and the Cloud Foundation's advocacy really re-energized the movement. And from my perspective, it brought a new generation of advocates and organizations into the mix. And what changed, as far as I'm aware, is that the movement went from a sustained focus on what was happening from episodic outrage. So previously the BLM would round up a prominent herd, there would be a lot of opposition, and then it would die down and it would happen again in a couple of years. So this movement, this re-energized movement, really had a sustained focus on the issue. We weren't going away. It also happened at a time with the digital revolution and social media and digital tools for grassroots mobilizing that made building that grassroots base very much easier and more efficient. There was a pretty consistent observation with wild horse advocates at the roundups, and that really sustained presence and getting that information out to the media was very powerful in raising public awareness and turning up the heat on BLM. And then for my perspective at AWHC, when I took the director of the campaign role, my background before animal welfare was in politics. So I really viewed this as a very political issue. We were up against a very powerful lobby, the cattlemen, the American Farm Bureau, some of the biggest lobbies in Washington. And we really needed a political strategy and a grassroots strategy to organize the power of the people as the only thing that could counter these lobbies. So we put a lot of investment into grassroots mobilization. My founding donor and board member was Ellie Phipps Price. She built this with me, and Denise was there. So we were able to hire a political strategist who I'd worked with previously in my political life, Joe Trippi, and he created really the grassroots infrastructure that we needed, the infrastructure that we needed to build that grassroots base and become self-sustaining financially. So that was super important. And then also at this time, AWHC launched a very focused litigation strategy where we took on cases strategically, and others did at the time as well. Wild Horse Education filed some important lawsuits. And we really, held the BLM's feet to the fire because at that time they were kind of sloppy, and it was easier to challenge what they were doing because they were not crossing all their T's and dotting their I's in their NEPA process and things like that. So we launched that legal strategy, and then again, we weren't going away. When I say we, I say collectively the movement was there. We were at the roundups, we were in the courts, we weren't going away. So since that time, I think there has been a lot of progress. The movement has the largest grassroots base, I think, since Wild Horse Annie got the laws passed originally, and perhaps more because we now have the digital tools to bring people in. AWHC alone has about 800,000 followers and supporters. Skydog Sanctuary, amazing. They have over 1.3 million, at least 1.3 million people following. So it's a very large grassroots space. It's not big enough to get the job done yet, but it is very strong. It's heard in Washington, and I think there's real progress that's been made in organizing it. We have a scientifically validated alternative to roundups. AWHC's Virginia Range Fertility Control Program was the subject of a scientific study that was published in 2024 in the journal Vaccines, and it demonstrated, or it affirmed, the viability and the feasibility of using this approach as a non-lethal humane management tool in a large wild horse herd in a large habitat area. And of course, there are other organizations that approve this model as well: Pine Nut Wild Horse Advocates, Salt River Wild Horse Management Group, Sandwash Advocate Team, Wild Horses of America Foundation. There are a lot of small fertility control projects that are successful and are reducing the birth rate so that the numbers of horses being removed from the range will be less. Or in the case of some of the places, there have been no removals after the fertility control program was put in place. And then we set a lot of legal precedents to stop roundups and save herds. Like Laura Lee's lawsuit over the First Amendment was hugely important. She won it at the Ninth Circuit. It guarantees the right to observe roundups as a government operation under the First Amendment. AWHC partners with Cloud Foundation and Return to Freedom on many of these lawsuits, where we had 10th Circuit precedents that said the BLM can't treat the public lands as private, and they can't remove horses from the public lands just because a private landowner asks for it. That 10th Circuit also ruled that it was illegal to bring populations down below the low AML. And in the Ninth Circuit, they ruled that the BLM is not obligated to remove horses just because they exceed the AML, and that the agency has discretion, if they determine there's an overpopulation, to address that in a variety of ways. That could include fertility control, and it could include reducing livestock stocking rates. So there have been a string of victories along the way that established very important case law and saved some herds, including, so far, the battle's still underway, but so far the checkerboard herds in Wyoming. And then there have been policy wins. We've defeated several attempts at slaughter. We've added the forest, and I'm saying we collectively, because there are a lot of groups. We work, AWHC work closely with Animal Welfare Institute, but there are a lot of groups lobbying on this. And several years ago, we got the Forest Service added to the ban on slaughtering horses. There was a loophole in the law The Forest Service was not bound by that slaughter prohibition. The Devil's Garden Forest Service was planning to sell horses for $1 without restriction on their use, and they could be sold for slaughter. And so we mobilized the California congressional delegation and state officials, and we got that prohibition added. So that was a big deal. And there's fertility control funding and increasing directives from the Congress to shift away from roundups toward humane in the wild management. And then there was just a wild horse caucus formed, the first ever congressional wild horse caucus, which will really provide a forum for raising awareness and educating other members of Congress about the issue. State action, we got Colorado legislation, state support for fertility control, and a working group formed. We got a California state anti-slaughter bill passed to strengthen our ban on horse slaughter, and that was prompted by the whole Devil's Garden situation. So that was signed into law by Governor Brown. And then there are collaborative models. You know, the longer I've been in this, the more I think that collaborative models are super important. So the Colorado Working Group brought together a lot of interested parties, from ranchers to tribes to wild horse advocates to conservationists, and they've come up with a report with real consensus behind maximizing the use of fertility control and eliminating, as a long-term goal of eliminating wild horse roundups, and they've even got the BLM on board with that. And the same thing with our AWHC's Utah Cedar Mountain project. We developed a great collaboration with the BLM under the directorship of Greg Sheehan was the state director. He was a great leader who was willing to push some boundaries. And we worked with the AWHC worked with the BLM, the local rancher, the permittee for the whole area, and also Wild Horses of America Foundation, to pull together a fertility control program in this HMA. And it was a very good example of collaboration with the BLM agreeing to the long-term goal of eliminating helicopter roundups. And then there's also been a huge jump in public awareness over the last 15 years. But there's unfinished business. Obviously, roundups continue. 68,000 wild horses and burros were rounded up between fiscal year 2020 and 2024. And there are 64,000 horses and burros in holding right now. There are a lot more horses than burros. And currently there are more wild horses in captivity than remain free in the wild. So I'm just going to share some lessons learned and then give some ideas about opportunities for the future. So the biggest lesson I've learned is real systemic change takes 25 to 30 years. There are no quick fixes on this issue. We're confronting a very entrenched system. And if you look at examples of other animal welfare or social movements, there is a 20 to 30-year arc from when there's a sustained focus on advocacy and change and public awareness to when change happens. And you can look at that with the campaign to get elephants out of circuses, the campaign to end chimpanzee research, which actually did happen. The NIH, National Institutes of Health, has ended chimpanzee research, and the chimpanzees remaining in labs went to sanctuaries. And then even outside the animal welfare field, smoking. It was 1970, I think, when the Surgeon General said smoking is dangerous for your health, but it was 30 years later that these smoking bans have come into place, and the whole cultural attitude has shifted about smoking. And that's our goal, to make it culturally unacceptable to treat wild horses and burros in this way. And that goal is going to take time, and it's underway, but it takes time. And then I think we really need to do some This is a big topic, but we really need to do some strategic thinking about the institutional barriers we face to securing real protection for wild horses and burros. And some of those barriers include weak laws. Everyone knows the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act has been weakened by amendments over the years, the most recent being the Burns Amendment, and 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, that opened the BLM to selling horses without restriction on slaughter. Now that is blocked every year by appropriations legislation, but it's a battle every year to get that in. You know, that amendment needs to be repealed, and some of the other weakenings need to be addressed legislatively. As I said before, we face a powerful opposition in the livestock lobby, very influential in DC, one of the biggest. The Farm Bureau is one of the biggest lobbies in Washington. And this really does deter Democratic and Republican support. I can't tell you how many lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have said, don't make it about the cattle. If you make it about the cattle, you lose. Make it about solutions, bring in collaborative solutions, and we're with you. But if you make it all about the cattle, you lose. So that is something I've taken to heart. And I think, as I said, we're not going to outspend these lobbies. So the power of the people is what we've got on our side, and we have to keep growing. We have to get bigger and stronger. And then, we're facing an entrenched bureaucracy. The BLM is very culturally resistant to new approaches. As one BLM official told me once, it's like literally painful for the BLM to do fertility control instead of roundups, because it's like an affront to their livestock way of doing things, which is they look at the horses like livestock. Most of them come from the livestock industry. And the way you manage livestock is you round them up and harvest them. And so it's very culturally difficult to get this agency to change. And then we don't have an ideal world when it comes to where the horses are living. So the whole system that's been created as a result of the law has created herd management areas that box wild horses and burros into artificial boundaries that cut them off from their migratory patterns and their ability to move to find forage and water seasonally and compensate and deal with changes to the environment or cyclical droughts and things like that. So they're boxed in, and then they're on lands from which predators are removed by hunting and also for the livestock industry. So mountain lions are very much demonstrated to be predators of wild horses and have the ability to keep some herds in check where mountain lions can live in the appropriate habitats, but they're exterminated by hunting and livestock interests, and so that it's not a natural system. And then of course they share it with livestock. Share is a charitable word. They're given the scraps after livestock are allocated most of the forage, and they're outnumbered 30-1 on BLM lands. And so the competitive uses of public lands, primarily with the livestock industry, is something that really prevents us from having the vision that we all want, which is wild, free-roaming herds, self-sustaining, and in check with the environment naturally. So unfortunately, in that sort of situation, some sort of management is necessary. The idea that they're under the law, that they're all just going to run free and be fine, it's not realistic. And then the last thing is this invasive narrative, this narrative that wild horses and burros are invasive and therefore destructive to the environment. And it's a false framing of the issue, both because it's very well established that the wild horse is a native reintroduced North American wildlife species, and it ignores modern research and science that's showing the important role of wild horses and burros in the environments where they live, from their grazing, the beneficial effects of their grazing, the movement, their wide-ranging migratory animals, the movement of their hooves in terms of soil health, the wild burros and wild horses in some cases digging wells to make surface water available, and that promotes biodiversity. And then, of course, well, I forgot what I was going to say. But anyway, oh yes, that the wild horses in Europe, it's very well established that wild equids have a role in rewilding degraded ecosystems. But in America, it's not. And America is dominated by invasion biology. And this is a big problem because it brings some conservation groups in alignment with industry groups against wild horses and burros, and also other animals like barred owls, which is something I'm working on. But this means that we're getting it from both sides. We're getting it from the livestock industry, and we're getting it from conservation groups, some conservation groups, in terms of fighting for wild horses. So each of those areas really requires a long-term strategy for addressing and breaking them down. And then in terms of strategic priorities, this is something I put together, Scott Wilson put together, and we used at AWHC to sort of, vision where we're going. And so the short term is stop the helicopters, prevent mass slaughter, which we're all working on, and flipping the model from removals to in the wild conservation, managing the horses in the wild, shifting to humane on-range management. And then the medium to long term is reimagining wild horse conservation, focusing on rewilding, expanding habitats, taking back some of the habitat that's been lost, or partnering with private partners to expand the habitat that's available to wild horses and burros. I really think that private-public partnerships in the future for land for wild horses are going to be super important. And then promoting ecotourism to really demonstrate the value of wild horses economically. And I know Chris knows about that because there's very strong feelings on the business community and the political community in North Dakota about the ecotourism value of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park wild horses. And also these horses, these pretty pictures here, are the Fish Springs wild horses that are in the Carson Valley in Nevada. And they're very strongly supported by the county and the business community because they are a top ecotourism draw. So that is one of the keys to sort of reimagining conservation. And then for 2026 and beyond, I just have a few pieces of advice, which you can take or leave, but this is based on my experience. Know your history. When I've read books about the history of this issue, it really becomes apparent to me that wild horse advocates and BLM have been locked in their own unsustainable paths. So the BLM doubling down on roundups for decades when they know it doesn't work, and the wild horse advocates really focusing on like cattle versus horses, and not really progressing far. And so I think I have at the end some resources, but the two books that I've read that really, and I read this first book over and over. It's Wild Horse Country by Dave Phillips, and it is such a good history of the issue. You can understand where the BLM has been, where advocacy has been, and it gives you ideas of where we need to go. Wild Horse Country by Dave Phillips, and then there's another book about Wild Horse Annie by Alan Kania, who was a friend of Velma Johnston, and it really focused on the advocacy side of her work, and it really, I think you'll see that many times we're just locked in the same battle that she was locked in all those years ago. And so really I think this history is really necessary to understanding and really putting a focus on how do we do things differently? How do we break through this stalemate that's been in place for the last 50 years? And then, like I said before, collaboration is super important. And that, that is intra movement collaboration. Obviously, our biggest weakness is the divisions that are in our movement. But also it means reaching out to willing government partners, um, and other interested parties like ranchers in Cedar Mountain. We reached out to the BLM and said we want you to consider this alternative plan for Anarchy Roundup, and we didn't get the alternative plan enacted, but what we did get was a commitment to work with us, that the BLM actually allowed us to have a representative at in the trap, when they were doing the roundup, to identify the horses coming in and to help choose which horses should go back. And the BLM did end up returning like 150 horses to the range. And that started, a good relationship where we built trust. And then it led to the Cedar Mountain Project. And the BLM actually introduced us to the local rancher there who had the permits. And he was like, yeah, I'm in favor of this. And his name is Christopher Robinson, and he is the CEO of Ensign Ranches. And he is the only rancher I've ever heard say, ranching on public lands is a responsibility, and is a responsibility. I'm sorry. Ranching on public lands is a privilege, not a right, and therefore we have the responsibility to be good stewards of the land, and that includes taking care of the wild horses. So it was just a really great partnership there, but it started by just picking up the phone and offering to be useful. So I think that's really important. And then unify. My biggest dream is that the wild horse advocacy movement can rally behind a few shared priorities and present a coordinated front for maximum impact. So really looking at the situation that we're facing now and what our top priorities should be, and then everyone speaking from with the same voice and the same messaging. And then do the work. This is really the most significant, I think. Is build the power from the ground up through community organizing. Like, social media engagement is fabulous, but it's not enough. The boots on the ground stuff, the doing the work, and here I have two shining examples of people who did the work. Chris, obviously, with her crusade to save the Teddy Roosevelt National Park horses. There she is with Secretary of Interior Doug Burgum. He was governor then, and she really worked the whole gamut of possibilities, from local community, business community, elected officials, tribes, pulled together a really masterful grassroots campaign there, and it's resulting in a federal bill that's moving through the Congress and likely to pass. So kudos to Chris. Great example of rolling up your sleeves and getting the work done that needs to get done. And similarly, Simona Netherlands with the Salt River Wild Horse Management Group. She, 2012, the Forest Service was going to remove the horses, very similar to what Chris was facing. The horses were not federally protected under the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act. And Simona organized massive public opposition, almost unified, except one congressman did not go along, but every other member of the federal Arizona delegation, including the two senators, Senator McCain and Flake at the time, they opposed the removal. The state legislature, she got to introduce a bill, and Doug Ducey, you see there, he was the governor of Arizona, strongly behind protecting the Salt River horses. In fact, I think the bill passed, I get the dates all mixed up, but anyway, when the bill passed in Arizona, that the year the bill passed, Governor Ducey counted protecting the Salt River wild horses as one of the top achievements of his entire administration that year. And so there's Simona, Doug Ducey, and Greg Patterson, who a lawyer that AWHC hired to help get that legislation through, a lobbyist. Okay, so then I'm going to close with opportunities. It's the year of the fire horse. There's a potential for transformational change in the spirit of that year. We have increasing bipartisan support on the Hill. We have the Trump administration taking some really significant actions toward animal welfare, from forming Justice Department, forming a task force to enforce animal welfare laws, to different agencies vowing and committing to phase out animal testing, to the Health and Human Services Department saying that it's going to look at eliminating research on primates because chimpanzee research doesn't happen anymore. The chimpanzees are great apes, but monkeys are regularly used in research and tortured. And also the Navy just eliminated painful experimentation on dogs and cats. So there's a lot going on the animal welfare level, and it's you know, it should be all of our goal is to, you know, try to elevate the wild horse issue and horse protection into the administration sphere and into the conservative community, which is something I'm working on a little bit, to try to elevate that and get some action, to have the administration include wild horses and horses generally into their animal welfare initiatives. And then finally, I think this is a really big opportunity for organizing around. There is a global documentary that was just premiered this week, and it's produced by one of the top nature film producers in the world, Plimsoll Films, and it is going to first air on big screens in theaters, museums, science centers. It's going to have longevity. These big screen films like this play for years, and schools bring school children to see them. And it's got a really great potential for raising awareness in new audiences. It's also, after it premieres for maybe a year on the big screen, it's going to go streaming on one of the big platforms, streaming platforms. And so, you know, you can, because of AWHC's financial partnership, this documentary includes 2 segments on wild horses, including one filmed in Fish Springs in Nevada. And I think this is a really good opportunity for people all over the country to organize screenings at theaters in their communities, go to where it's playing, hand out information. And one of the real things I think that it could be organized around is passing the SAFE Act, because this is a celebration of horses generally worldwide, and each story illustrates some characteristic that's associated with the horse, like strength, speed, intuitiveness, healing power, and then the wild horses. And so it's just going to create a love for horses even beyond what people have now. And it provides a really good organizing platform, I think, for people in their communities. So if you're interested in that, you should contact Scott or Amelia at AWHC. They have the information about screenings and things like that. But I thought I might play it for a minute. It's only 1:35, so I'm going to see if this works. Yes.
For thousands of years, there's been an exceptional bond between horses and humans. A partnership that has shaped the course of history. We rely on their speed, their courage, and loyalty, and even their intuition. deserving of our protection. Join us on a global adventure and experience the ride of a lifetime. Horsepower. Coming soon to IMAX and giant screen theaters.
So anyway, that's the film. Because of our involvement, AWC's involvement, we were able to kind of have input into the script so that it's all very horse focused and, you know, talking about horses, the value of horses in their own right versus how they can serve humans. And the other segment of the film that's about wild horses is a Navajo horse whisperer who rescues an orphaned Mustang. And the whole story, especially because of our input too, talks about what she's lost from losing her wild family and the social bonds and all that, and what they have to give her in return. So it's a really good film. So I think it's a great organizing platform. And then that's it. That's the end. I talked a lot, I'm sorry, but just, I always say this, that in a world where so much of the wild has been lost, there's still a place where wild horses still run free, and that matters, and it's up to us to save it. So I thank everyone on this call from the bottom of my heart for being involved in this fight for wild horses and burros. So thanks for listening to me. Oh, here, I can send this to you guys, but here's my list of resources, books that are interesting. This is what Welcome to the Year of the Horse is an op-ed I just co-authored with Christian Josie, and it's been published in a conservative news site. So it's just trying to reach out to different audiences. And then these are the three of the bills that I think are most important this year. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. That was great. And if you want to send me your resource list, I can add it to our website under your name so people can just download it from there too, and then just kind of directs people to one place. Isabella said Skydog just reported that 34 Mustangs in a kill pen in Texas, most under age 11 and sold in Oklahoma, are on their way to slaughter. Claire writes, though officially for the BLM, slaughter is the table. It seems okay if a middleman is doing the shipping. How do we get beyond the smoke and mirrors of the BLM?
Yeah. Yes, I know about that, and I've been working with Claire on that. And so it appears that last year AWHC threw a lawsuit, and Skydog, AWHC and Skydog filed a lawsuit to shut down the adoption incentive program that the BLM had. And it seems that when that was shut down, they've just shifted the traffic to the sales program. So the first place to start is getting the documentation that this is happening. We know it's happening. We're working on getting documentation and then getting it to Congress. So that's the key. So we're looking at ways of finding out how many horses they're going to slaughter, who's going to slaughter, who's buying them, and putting it all together because that's the first step. But yes, I know it's happening. It's a constant struggle. If you read Wild Horse Country, the book, you will see that every decade BLM does the same thing. They go to Congress, they say we have a terrible overpopulation problem. The Congress allocates money for big roundups, and the BLM figures out a slaughter scam. So whether it's um, giving away truckloads of horses for free, that was one of them in the 90s or the 80s. And then they also allowed purchasing by proxy, where people were buying a lot of horses for kill buyers. That got shut down. The truckloads for free got shut down. The Tom Davis, where they BLM was selling over 1,000 horses to a known kill buyer who said he was using them in Mexico for movies, that got shut down. Like, yeah, it's staying vigilant. And then, of course, the adoption incentive program was the latest slaughter scam. And now BLM is moving a lot of horses out through sales. So it's getting the documentation and then going to Congress, looking at legal ways to stop it. Yeah, it is happening, but um, it's it's something that I'm aware of and involved in working on.
Thank you for that. And everybody, we did have a presentation by Ashley Avis from the Wild Beauty Foundation. They have a Lost Horses campaign that's really focusing on the SAFE Act.
Right.
And it's something that Eric Mulvar talked about yesterday too in his presentation. There are more than enough co-sponsors on the SAFE Act for that to hopefully be able to pass the House without a problem. So again, if you look at that, look at her presentation, there may be some more information there on ways that you can stay involved there. And I did also want
Yeah.
to note that the Wild Horse Annie book that you are talking about, I would suggest everybody read that. When I read it, I was like, this is just the same world that we're living in right now. It's so
Exactly.
crazy how we have the same issues, the same narratives, the same everything. Um, for what, 60 years now?
Yes.
So yeah, very, very education. That's the biggest reason why we do this. Is education is the biggest thing that's going to make us make a difference, and really educating yourself, putting your feelings aside and keeping facts on the table. So um,
Mm-hmm.
between all the organizations working to save the wildies, is it possible to get a few permanent lobbyists in DC?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of permanent lobbyists in DC. AWHC has two. Joanna at Animal Welfare Institute is their lobbyist in DC. She's very knowledgeable, very good. And then, of course, the ASPCA and the Humane Society, now they're called Humane World, they also have lobbyists that are pretty much full time on the Hill. But again, they're spread out over a lot of issues. So they're there. It's just a matter of how do we coordinate what people are doing, what different groups are doing.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about rewilding initiatives, um, and how you see that, or how you visualize that helping. I think part of like things that I hear is, if we're rewilding horses that are in BLM holding, how do we have reproductive horses? Like, how do we continue to have wild horses when, the stallions are gelded, and, mares are sometimes double treated with Gonacon, or, the risks of sterilization and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think there's like two kinds of rewilding, like real rewilding horses and holding, which I'm all in favor of, is more rescue with benefits to the land from horse grazing or whatever. But real rewilding is actually, returning horses to the landscape to restore landscapes in the most natural way possible, to set up the most natural, balanced ecosystems that you can have. So that involves having predators, that involves multiple species, and that's more of what's happening in Europe right now. The rewilding the horses and holding is great, but it's not the full vision of a rewilding program that exists in Europe. Although I know with the rewilding, like Rewild America Now, I know that they do have scientists working with them to help restore the land where the horses are being put out. But you're right, they're not reproducing herds, so it's not technically a truly wild situation. But I mean, we got to do something about the horses in holding, and that's, I'm all in favor of that solution. So interestingly, AWHC has a land preserve in Fish Springs, and there's going to be some research started there looking at the horses' grazing patterns and particularly their impact on wildfire suppression, which is huge right now. And the way they, how I don't know if you know, but the BLM always says the horses don't eat the cheat grass when it's dry, right? And a lot of the livestock, the science that goes on that comes out of the range management livestock perspective says, oh, the cheat grass isn't nutritious for the horses. But all wild horse advocates who watch these herds know that the horses eat dried cheat grass. And this study's looking at their consumption of dried cheatgrass and other forage, and how that because that's so flammable, that kind of forage. So the horses are grazing that down and providing a real benefit to the ecosystem and communities around by suppressing wildfire. So, and it's done naturally. So that's some exciting research coming out. So I think we need more of that, and we need to bring those European experts over here to start raising awareness and chipping away at that invasion biology mentality, which is almost adhered to with a religious fervor. I mean, like literally. And so anytime they think and it's all based on the species that were here on this, in what's now the United States, when Europeans first laid eyes on the continent. It doesn't consider that environments change, species come and go. It's a very static view of nature. And once they slap an invasive label on an animal, it obscures any ability to look at their effects in an unbiased way. The only thing that's done is they focus on negative effects. And so it's a real problem, and there are scientists who are really trying to chip away at that mentality and ideology. It is an ideology, and so it's a real problem. But I think bringing people over who from Europe that are working in these programs and trying to raise awareness here and change things is good, and supporting the scientists who are looking at it from a more global perspective of what do these animals bring to the environment. Like Eric Lundgren's research on the wild burros and how they dig wells and make water available, and all of that stuff. So I think it's super important, because it's hard enough to fight the battle for the wild horses when the livestock industry is your opponent, but when the Center for Biological Diversity is your opponent, and the livestock industry and the hunters, and it's like unholy alliance between the Center for Biological Diversity, the trophy hunters, the livestock industry to get rid of horses. They're also supporting this crazy plan to kill the Fish and Wildlife Service, to hire sharpshooters to kill 500,000 barred owls in a attempt to save the spotted owl in western forests. But it's not going to work, number one. The only thing that's going to work is saving their habitat. And number two, it's a program embraced by the logging industry, because the BLM has said, well, once the barred owl program is in place, then we'll give you permits to take, it's called under the Endangered Species Act, spotted owls, which means harming them or their habitat. And we'll use that barred owl situation program as a mitigation for that. So there's letters from the logging industry saying, let's get this program going. And so Center for Biological Diversity is teaming up with the logging industry to promote this massive, immoral, in my opinion, killing program of barred owls, which is going to actually be counter to the real solution, which is saving the habitat. So it's a big problem. I think supporting the science that's really looking at how beneficial these animals are in the environment is super important.
So that brings me to another question because yesterday we had a great talk with Eric Mulvar from Western Watersheds, and he gave us all some really great scientific information, benefits to wild horses, all the things that you're talking about. And people asked in the chat yesterday, why don't we have this with wild horse organizations? And I know that next week, so everybody knows, Nicole from AWHC, and she's also a wildlife biologist,
Yeah.
will be doing a talk. But is there somebody within AWHC, because I'm sure there's many layers that we don't know about AWHC. I know that there's a lot of things people don't know about what we did to save the Theodore Roosevelt horses. So I can't imagine on a larger scale all the things we
Right.
don't know about what goes on behind the scenes at AWHC. But is that something that you guys have explored, or have you guys been working with wildlife biologists like Eric Mulvar to help prove your points?
Yeah, we've been working with Eric Lundgren, the scientist who's done the burrow studies and things like that. And Eric Mulvar too. He's very knowledgeable, but Eric Lundgren is doing the research, and the messaging is important. We have to start integrating this more into the advocacy messaging about the beneficial role that the horses are playing, and how we're, like Eric Lundgren has said, that the language around being a symbol of freedom and all that stuff, that doesn't appeal to like conservationists, right? And that's another discussion about messaging appropriate for different audiences. But to have a broader messaging about the role in the ecosystem that these animals are playing, I think is very important. And I know when I was at AWC, I was trying to get that more into the messaging. And I'll add to the resource list. There's a group called the Rewilding Institute, and they have a great article on their website about encompassing all the beneficial effects of wild horses, and it's really positive, good article. So I'll put that on the resource list before I send it to you. Um, and I absolutely think it's important to be incorporating this information. I'm glad Eric Mulvar covered it yesterday. Yeah.
And I have one more question for you. If anybody else has questions, put them in the chat, and I appreciate your time. I know the answer to this, but I think it would be helpful if you talked about this because I know I hear a lot. Why isn't AWHC suing the BLM more? Like, why don't we see more cases of that? Maybe you can speak to that a little bit. Because I know it's an area of frustration for advocates. And when we see what happened with the checkerboard herd and we have a little bit of hope, why isn't there more of that?
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, when I was there, I touched on this earlier, but in the early days of litigation, the BLM was a lot sloppier. So we were able to sue them over deficiencies in their environmental assessments and things like that. They've cleaned up their act quite a bit. So some of those avenues for suing have been foreclosed. And then, we are also dealing with a weak laws, like I said. And so it's always a balance to think about whether you take the risk of suing on a case that doesn't have really a chance of winning, to call attention to the problem or whatever. And you have to balance that with creating bad case law that makes it harder to sue in the future on a better case. So I think AWHC has always looked at the fact pattern, what the chances of winning are, and then made a decision on that balance. So with the checkerboard, there's never been such a large scale elimination of habitat because it's checkerboard. And our recent decision out of the 10th Circuit on that issue, it said that the law prescribes only one reason why you can remove horses over AML, and that's if it's necessary to restore the thriving natural ecological balance. And in this case, their environmental assessment, or it was environmental impact statement, said specifically there is a thriving natural ecological balance in this area with the horse populations at the current levels, but we're doing it for management convenience, and that's not legal. And so that was a good decision out of the 10th Circuit that, you can't do that. The only reason you can do that is to restore the thriving natural ecological balance, and you have to have the data to support that. So it's just a balancing act, and we would all like to be able to just sue and stop roundups, but unfortunately the law has been amended in a way that allows a lot of this stuff to happen.
I think that too, something that I feel like I've learned over the last few years is sometimes it's not only just litigation, but like working with a law firm and having them corresponding with an agency also sometimes adds pressure to things that, you may not have seen that outcome coming where you don't have to go to court. And I think that those are things that people don't see that I'm sure are happening within AWHC also.
Oh yeah, that's a really good point. And that is something that's happening where lawyers will write letters to the agencies, and then be engaged with the most recent case was the Forest Service over Devil's Garden. The attorney wrote a letter, DOJ called us, said we want to call with you, and begins a conversation without suing. So that's a really important observation, Chris. Yeah.
Um, Isabella said, it seems to me we need more cohesion amongst organizations as there's muscle in numbers. Livestock is powerful because they come together on a common goal. We have to find a way to unsettle their throne. Very true. And I think we've talked about that a number of times throughout this presentation, throughout this summit. Um, we had a great conversation again with Ashley Avis, who said, yeah, 1,000%. I think, and I'm sure you'll agree, with the flooding the zone that's happening right now in our world. And if you have anything to add to this, I would welcome that. I mean, how do we keep the wild horse issue, um, on top of things when we have so many things happening, like Minnesota, Venezuela, Greenland, all these different things happening? It's like we're competing not only with mainstream media to get a voice out there for these horses, but then we, like, very stupidly compete with ourselves. I agree. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or how we keep the horses in the spotlight.
Yeah, I know it is. It's pretty overwhelming what's happening. Um, but I think it's just a matter of persistence, and it feels to me it feels weird. Like when I was writing the op-ed for the conservative news site, it's like there's so much going on, and we're talking about, horses, um but the wheels keep turning, right? The people in Congress are still answering constituent emails. They're still dealing with this issue. It's happening. So I think we just have to keep the focus on. The media is a little harder to get some coverage with everything that's going on, but not impossible. So I think it's just a matter of persistence and keeping the focus.
I agree. Anybody else have any other questions for Suzanne before we say goodbye? And you did mention, and I know in your Substack you've mentioned a few times, it is the year of the fire horse, and that is the next presentation I'm going to be giving at 2 o'clock, just to talk about what that means and a little bit of history on that. And then if you send me your resource page, I'll add that to our website so that people can have that too. So thank you again, and thank you to everybody for being here and for educating yourself. And Suzanne, thank you for your decades of wild horse advocacy and animal activism. So um, thank you again, and I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate everyone taking the time today.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye. Bye.